Can you think of a man's face who has been printed 2,026 million times since the beginning of 2009? How about thinking of a man's face who's been plastered in every American history book and currently has a 60-foot sculpture of his face on the side of a cliff in South Dakota? Give up? What if I told you this man was a president and is one of few to be assassinated while in office? Now I hope you're all not thinking of John F. Kennedy, because the answer to the question is Abraham Lincoln. That's right. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States and is one of the most famous presidents. However, many students still don't know everything there is to know about Abraham Lincoln. That's where I come into play. Today I'm going to give you a brief summary of his life in 3 areas: his early childhood, his family, and his accomplishments as a U.S. president. All these will help paint a better picture in your mind of who this man is, where he came from, and what he did. First off, his childhood. Let's start with the basics. Abraham Lincoln was born February 12, 1809 in a log cabin in Sinking Spring Farm, Kentucky. His parents' names were Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hawk, and both of them were farmers, and they were both uneducated. Abraham Lincoln had one sister. Her name was Sarah. She was 2 years older. And back then, they had no doctors to deliver babies. They had no medicine to help with pain. So having children in 1809 would often result in death. So lucky enough for Abraham, they survived. However, a few years later, Nancy, his mom, got ill and passed away. Abraham Lincoln was only 9. A year later, in 1819, his father remarried to Sarah Johnson. His new stepmother brought with her 3 children, making a full house. Sarah picked up where Nancy left off. She provided books and influenced Abraham in his studies. As for school in Abraham's early years, there's not very a record. Sorry. As for school in Abraham's life, there's hardly a record in the beginning. Also, Abraham Lincoln's family is an unaffiliated Christian, meaning they never really took part in the church. Now that you've heard about Abraham Lincoln's childhood, let's step forward to his wife and children. Abraham Lincoln married Mary Ann Todd. Mary was born in Kentucky, as well as Abraham, and was born December 13, 1818, and died July 16, 1882, 17 years after Abraham Lincoln died. Mary was brought up in a wealthy family, and her parents disagreed with her marrying Abraham, for Abraham came from a poor family. Despite their differences, Abraham Lincoln proposed in 1839 in Springfield, and on November 4, 1842, they were married. Abraham Lincoln and Mary had 4 sons. The first one was Robert Todd Lincoln. He was born in 1843 and lived the longest out of all of his brothers. He lived 83 years and died in 1926. Edward Lincoln was the second child. He was born in 1846 and died 4 years later in 1850. Edward's cause of death is still unknown. Willie was their third child. He was born in 1850 and died in 1862 from a fever. And Thomas Lincoln was their fourth son. He was born in 1853 and also died of a disease in 1871. The death of Abraham's sons brought him and his wife much grief, and it was known that Abraham Lincoln was very depressed while in office. But nonetheless, Abraham Lincoln enjoyed playing games with his son. Their favorite thing to do was roughhousing. And when he wasn't working and he wasn't playing with his sons, he was reading poetry and Shakespeare to his wife. Now that you've heard about Abraham Lincoln's childhood and his family, we're going to talk about his life as a president and his death. Abraham Lincoln was elected president November 6, 1860, and soon after he took office, many of the southern states left the Union. They did not like Abraham because he stood against slavery, and this put Abraham Lincoln in an interesting spot, for he hated war, but he saw the only way to keep the Union together was to enter the war. Thus, the Civil War started February 9, 1861, and took place for 4 years. It ended with the surrender of the South to the North in 1865. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln gave many speeches, and one of his most famous speeches was the Emancipation Proclamation. 3 years after Abraham Lincoln was elected, was the Emancipation Proclamation, which was given January 1st, 1863. It declared that all persons who held a slave within rebellious states, those slaves were now free. Even though the proclamation didn't really set any slaves free, it did, however, change the views of the Northerners, who allowed blacks to join the Navy and Army, and by the end of the war, there was 200,000 blacks serving in the Union. Abraham Lincoln was also the first president to be assassinated. He was killed by John Wilkes Booth, who shot him in the back of the head, April 14, 1865. Abraham Lincoln and his wife were attending to play Our American Cousins at Ford's Theater in Washington when Abraham was shot. Booth thought by killing Abraham that it would be helping the South somehow, even though the war had already stopped 5 days earlier. In conclusion, now that you have a better idea of Abraham Lincoln Lincoln and who he was, where he came from, and his family, and his greatest accomplishments, now you know a little bit more about Abraham Lincoln. He was only 56 years old when he was shot, but he left a lasting impression in America. I hope every time you see a penny, you will think of who he is, where he came from, and what he accomplished in his life. Thank you.